All right.
Okay. So anyway,
So
we're talking about
try-
YMCA, and there's a summer camp east of Fresno on a small lake called Lake Sequoia, and it's near where the big trees are in General Grant Park. It's around 5,000 feet elevation, and so the county, the different YMCA areas had camps there. You know, there was one from this area. I think this is the Sequoia area, and I think they still go there.
Really?
The camp.
Oh, cool.
But there was one from Bakersfield and one from Fresno County.
All the different little counties.
And so I worked there as a counselor, and so these 8 to 12-year-old kids would come to camp. You know.
Did you go through as a camper as well, or you just got the job
You know,
as a counselor?
I don't think.
You don't think you did the camp just
No,
just the counselor?
I went when I was younger. I went to a summer camp. My mother was Seventh-day Adventist, and they had a camp at Wawona in Yosemite.
More of a church related. Like
Yeah,
religious-
right.
religious
It
camp
was
type.
totally church related, and so
Okay.
you know, and I went there a couple of times with a cousin who was my age, and I remember a backpacking trip once we took, and we went. It was near Glacier Point in Yosemite, which is up high.
Yeah.
And we hiked from our camp to Glacier Point, and we just had a piece of plywood with holes drilled in it that we could put a rope through, and we'd put that over our back and had some kind of a cotton sleeping bag.
Oh, and that's all you
Yeah, and
needed?
they carried enough food, I guess.
Uh-huh.
But, so there were probably 8 of us and a counselor who was like a junior or
Like
senior in
yeah.
high school, probably.
Like
Nice guy, I remember. Anyway, he told us ghost stories by the fire.
Oh,
we went
cool.
we went to sleep, and then coyotes started. I mean, at 1 o'clock in the morning or something, they could hear.
Oh gosh, everybody's like
And
waking
we're
up.
under sleep.
Oh
I mean, it
my
sounded like they
gosh.
were 5 feet away, you know. And then it gets cold. This is at like 7,000 foot elevation.
Yeah,
It gets pretty chilly
really
at night.
cold up there. You get all huddled up in your sleeping
Well,
bag.
and finally, my cousin and I were sleeping next to each other, and we'd taken pine boughs to make us, you know, we had no mattresses.
Yeah.
Anyways, we weren't sleeping that well, I guess, but these coyotes howling, and it was cold, and he's going.
Yeah,
His
it's so
teeth
cold.
were chattering.
So,
So you know what? We put our sleeping bags together.
Yeah, just kind of huddled up.
So we
with
kind
the
of got
body
together
heat,
just
yeah,
to stay warm.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean,
Anyway, then we
Yeah.
hiked, the next day we hiked down to the valley. So we went from Glacier Point to the valley the next day. We spent the next night in the valley. And in those days, Glacier Point, they used to get a big pile of bark and they'd set it on fire. And Camp Curry was in the valley, and they would say, from Glacier Point, they'd say, "Camp Curry, are you ready for the fire?" And Camp Curry would say, "Let the fire come down."
and then they
And all this bark, and you know, bark kind of is embery,
Yeah,
you know,
so
kind of
really-
red and
really-
blue. And so they'd push it over the cliff, and it would go down just across granite rocks, you know,
Yeah,
so there's
stuff
nothing to
like-
catch
yeah.
fire. Anyway, they did that for many years, and that was fun to
That
watch.
must have been the coolest thing to
Yeah.
look at.
Yeah.
And then you're like yelling at each
Oh,
other.
yeah,
That's
because
awesome,
it's
like
maybe
a-
2,000
yeah,
feet
that's
elevation.
like you gotta yell pretty loud.
Yeah,
That's cool.
that was fun.
So that's what you did as a kid, and then as a counselor, then you worked at the Y.
Yeah, and then, so I did that as a kid. Then as a counselor, I worked there for a couple of years. In fact, maybe my first year out of college, I might have worked there that
Came
summer.
back and worked there, yeah.
Well, in fact, I was waterfront director then. I was in the swim maintenance office.
Oh, cool.
But anyway, it's a typical summer camp sort of thing.
So that's
Water
neat.
sports,
Yeah.
some hiking.
Do you remember what you got paid?
Canoeing.
What was it, like $1 an hour or something? Or what was it? back
I
then?
don't remember getting paid very much.
Yeah, exactly.
It wasn't a big paying job, yeah.
Mhm, but
And, yeah, it was,
one
but
of
you know, the other counselors, in hindsight, I mean, I didn't realize at the time, there was Monty Clark, who was a football player from Kingsburg, and he was one of the other counselors, and he was a big guy, you know,
Big
a
old-
big guard.
Mhm.
He ended up, well, he played for, Monty Clark played for USC, and and then he was coach at Stanford for
Really?
one time, you know.
And you were a counselor with him?
Yeah, I was a counselor with him.
hindsight.
Another guy was Rafer Johnson. And Rafer Johnson was, he was a black guy, and he was also from the San Joaquin Valley.
From the same.
And he was one of the counselors there. So I got to know
A bunch of
and Rafer Johnson won the decathlon in the Olympics.
Wow.
So
you gotta know these guys.
yeah,
You get to know
right.
them pretty well. That's awesome.
And you know, they just I mean, that's
It's
the
like,
quality
yeah, it's
of
just like the people that were at that camp.
right,
That's
right,
neat,
yeah. The other thing through the YMCA that I just remembered, they had youth and legislature, and I bet they still have that.
That rings a bell.
But they would, you would go to Sacramento, and it's when the legislature is recessed for some reason, and you take over, and somebody gets elected governor and lieutenant governor, and then somebody's. I was chairman of the agricultural committee, I think, and anyway, we took the train from Fresno to Sacramento, and it had started in San Diego or in LA, and so there were all these
all kinds
high
of kids
school
from all over
kids
the
on
place.
this train, yeah.
Huh.
And so then when the next year or so when I went to Stanford, I knew.
You knew some of the kids from the trip that went to Stanford.
3 or 4 of them were on that went to
Sweet.
Stanford.
Do you remember your college your college like figuring out which one you wanted to go to, like admittance, the whole process? I mean,
Yeah, well, you know,
it's such a big deal these days.
You know, my father only went through the freshman year of high school, and my mother graduated from high school. Her older sister had maybe gone on to a teacher's college, but that was a couple of years probably in those days. And so my mother's older sister was her teacher in school.
Huh.
And
So it was so college is like. Do you think like the whole college concept, like the concept of like going to a college, was just kind of getting big, like right when you were?
well, yeah.
It's like.
It wasn't that big as it is now, but
it was like starting to grow,
Yeah,
like it was right at
yeah.
the beginning of the.
and you know, and I lived in the age when unfortunately that we could get an education. And my parents lived through the Depression, you know, and I mean that's why my dad quit school to go to work.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you had to.
Yeah.
So.
And as did a lot of his brothers, and we had a lot of brothers.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
So
You gotta
so
do
I, you know, I was the first one in my family to even
To-
go. Actually, my sister had gone.
Just to have the
She became a
opportunity.
dental assistant, and she studied in San Francisco for 2 years.
Oh, really?
She went to a college called Lux College and lived on Van
In
Ness.
San Francisco.
Remember we went to visit her one time, and there was a guy sitting on a power pole, you know, up about 50 feet above the street,
Uh-huh.
and he was setting a record as a pole sitter or whatever.
Oh, really? And
And
it was like,
how does he go to the bathroom?
Yeah.
And, you know, all those
Geez,
things. Anyway.
Crazy San Francisco people. I mean,
Yeah.
who knows what they're gonna do?
But so when I went in my senior year, I think it was my senior year. I don't think we did it in a junior year, but like you do, you take SATs.
Yeah.
But my high school principal, who had gone to Stanford, he was a Stanford graduate. He was an older guy. He was 50, 55. And he'd been the principal for my sister and brother-in-law.
Oh, so he was
And
there for a while.
he was
like
also the coach, and he had your Uncle Bill or my brother-in-law went to the state track meet, you know,
and he coached
in
it.
Hurdles. He coached him and taught him how to start and all that.
Whole 9 yards, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, he called me into his office, and he was pretty stern, and he was not the type of guy that I would talk to. You know, once he called me in.
Yeah.
And
I think you did something wrong.
yeah, right,
or something like that.
He says, "Where are you going to go to college?" And I said, "Fresno State," because that's where all the guys went.
Yeah, kind of
And,
pipeline.
Yeah, most of my classmates ended up going to Fresno State, and he said, "Well, I don't think you should." And I said, "Why?" And he says, "Well, because you're influenced by your friends too much." And I said, "Where do you think I should go?" He said, "I think you should go to Stanford."
Huh. Oh, man.
Anyway, so we drove me up here to Palo Alto. He said, I'll come by at 5 o'clock tomorrow. Drove me to Palo Alto.
Wow.
I can't tell the story. Sorry.
That's fun. That's amazing.
I took the college boards, they were called in those days, at Stanford. And
Is that the first time?
it's like
Stanford?
SATs.
Is that the first time you'd seen Stanford?
No, because I had a cousin from Los Angeles. He was Bob Sheldon, and he was quite a few years older than I was. He was 6 or 8 years older. But he went to Stanford, and there was a guy by the name of Bob Mathias, who at age 17 won the decathlon, and he was from Tulare. So, and they were fraternity brothers at Stanford. Bob had a car, and they'd stop by and pick up Bob and Bob Mathias, and they'd stop by our house on the way up to Stanford. So, so
that's what you had heard.
So I knew what Stanford was and so on, and I had this cousin.
That's so neat that your principal took you down there. And that's where you took the SAT down there. And
Yeah. Otherwise, I ended up in Fresno or Riverdale.
Yeah, or something. That's awesome.
Anyway, so that's how I chose to go to college. I applied to one college.
And just
And I
go
did,
to Stanford.
And a year, well, the following year, I was accepted, and I got this letter, and it said, admitted with honors and so on. I thought, well, that's neat. They really want to see me, So then, my freshman year at Stanford, somebody said that they were admitted with honors, and that was the top 10% of the class. And I said, what? Wow. So I got my parents to send this letter up to me, and I read it, and so I was...
the top 10% of your class?
I couldn't get it now.
Oh, it was... oh my gosh.
Anyway, so that's how I ended up here.
That's so neat.
Yeah. And then actually when I went to dental school, which was later,
that was at USC, right? You went for...
Right, but I was at Stanford. It was 2 years, and I knew from high school is what I wanted to do.
Was it kind of a culture shock going from Fresno to Stanford at all? Was it
Oh,
like a
yeah.
big
Well,
transition and like being away from your parents?
But
and
it's
everything?
fun, It's like high school is fun, but now you're away from your parents.
The whole...
And you can look at Playboy magazine,
Yeah,
and that's your mother
you
coming
can
in
do
the
whatever the
room.
heck you want, yeah. So you got used to it pretty quickly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was a cool transition though.
Yeah, it's an easy transition.
Yeah.
For most people,
Excited.
there's some people that have trouble, but not me. I was self-confident, kind of like you are.
Yeah, exactly.
It's easy. And
Did you have any idea what you were gonna major or like what you were gonna do when you went into Stanford? Or
I did. I had
so you
taken
were
aptitude test in high school and my senior year, and they said you wanted
for like dentistry.
You would be a good mortician or dentist. I don't know. I don't know why those two. But I had no desire to be a mortician.
Exactly. I don't know. But, so you knew that's because
yeah. So I took when I started college, I took the classes that I needed to get into dental school.
Okay, so you said like that's nice to know like what you're.
Oh
you're
yeah, most people don't know at that age.
Definitely.
But anyway, I took chemistry the first year and organic chemistry the second year and so on.
Were they fun classes? Like I remember just from my experience when I visited Yale, like I just went to that one history class. And the professor, he just seemed like the smartest guy like I'd ever. It just seems like you learn a ton in those classes.
Yeah,
it's like
you
really,
do.
really helpful.
Our freshman year, we took history of Western civilization, and we went through Egypt in 2 days, and we went through the Roman Empire in
so much stuff
3 days, and,
right through.
and then just right up to the present time. Anyway, so it was sort of an overall picture, and we didn't spend any time on Asia or anything because they weren't westernized, so we didn't even pay attention to that part of the world.
Was Stanford campus like how different is Stanford campus now compared to what it was when you were there?
The original campus, which is the square part around the church there and so on. And it didn't change a lot for many years during the Depression and so on. And then the Second World War came along, and there were more women than men there, I think, during the war, because
all the men were
all the men were in the army and or the military. And then after the war, there was a great, in fact, where SRI is in Palo, or where Midland Atherton High School is, across the street from there, that was a military base in the Second World War.
Really?
Yeah. And so then all the veterans came back, and they had benefits, would pay them to go to school.
That's
And
they all
so
came
they,
back into
they
Stanford.
came back and went to Stanford, and then so
that's when, like,
there was pressure on housing and classrooms and everything.
So that's when they had to start kind of like renovating.
So it really, what Stanford is now today didn't really start until the 50s probably. And so when I went there was Hoover Tower was there.
It was there. So
Hoover
it's
Tower, because that was from Herbert Hoover, was in the 20s, see that, and so
So
I'm not sure when that was built, but then
was the oval there?
yeah, it was just dirt
Yeah,
at the time, there's no grass. That's only been about the last 15 years that somebody donated the money to take care of that forever. Yeah. But between Hoover Tower and Encina Hall, which is across from I think you call it the Ford Athletic.
Yeah.
Across the street that way.
That
was Encina. That, for the first 55 years of Stanford, that was the men's dormitory. It was mostly a men's college to start with. So I think there were 550 men.
And that's where you stayed.
And that's where
you were.
So 5 West. My room is on the top, looking out toward Hoover Tower.
Huh.
And we were the last class, and that would have been in 1955.
Before they switched it, did they?
Well, they like I said, there was great pressure to add more dorms.
So that's when they added the year.
Yeah, they started. There's what's it called, Wilbur Hall, and
all those.
All those were built.
That's what was put in.
Right. And they started building.
Okay.
So that's when the campus started expanding, and then they needed more. Eventually, they needed more classroom space and so on, beyond the original square.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
just keep expanding.
so Hewlett and Packard and Berry, and they gave money for some scientific lecture halls and so on, which have all been torn down now. But they were built in the 60s, 50s and 60s. And now there's a whole new quadrangle of science buildings. But anyway, between Hoover Tower and Encina,
that's where
was a field of wild oats, and where Escondido Village is.
Yeah.
That was all wild oats, and they used to cut it in the springtime and bale it,
and just it was all.
And there was no, around the stadium there was no landscaping per se.
It was just kind of flat land.
Yeah.
Was Palo Alto there?
Palo Alto was there.
It was just kind of like a little bit.
Well, from the beginning, no, it was a pretty good sized city. In fact,
it still was.
It does not change population. I think there was 55,000 when we moved here, and there's 65,000.
There's not much difference.
It's been a no growth policy in the city, so it's about the same as it was.
Okay, so it wasn't.
Everything south of Oregon Expressway was built in post World War II, so in the 40s and 50s, that's when that was.
That's when that all came up.
And Palo Alto was a dry town. There's Prohibition. Have you ever heard of Prohibition?
Yeah. So Palo Alto.
Well, the Hoovers were, not the Hoovers, the Stanfords were
against alcohol?
Yeah. They were prohibitionists. And so they put it in the deed, and so they had this land around here.
All this.
And they were going to build this university, so Timothy Hopkins was a friend of theirs, so they said, we can build a town. So they gave them this land, but they put in a deed restriction that said if alcohol is ever sold on this property, it reverts back to the university. So the town developed as a dry town, which is not real unusual. There's still dry towns in Oklahoma and some of the Bible Belt in the center of America.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, it was after And so this started in 1890s.
The-
Palo Alto was dry, and so it was a dry town until
Yeah, when did that change?
in the late 60s.
So like right about like when you were in the, oh well,
It was
would've
after
been
we came
after
here.
you left.
After
yeah,
we
you
came
would've
back
been-
and
yeah.
lived here, yeah. So it was, of a night, you could shoot a cannon down on University Avenue, there would be nobody on it.
Yeah.
You wouldn't hit anybody.
So you were
Because there was no bars or they couldn't.
yeah. So you were what? You were 55 to.
Well, I was at Stanford 54. I started in the
54.
fall of 54 and I left in the spring of 56.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then you went to USC, and then when you came back, that's when it reverted. To
Right. And then after we came back.
What was the difference in the?
In fact, Omi didn't want to. This was a
To go.
sleepy old town, and she was a.
It was all hip hop.
She was a hip hopping LA girl,
Oh,
and
yeah.
she was pretty. She
Kinda
wasn't
iffy
too
about
sure
coming
about
back,
living in
really?
the sleepy little town of Palo Alto.
Huh.
It's ironic. It's
How it all
It's
ends
just the
up now,
opposite. You can't find a parking place.
but yeah, exactly. Was it? So what was the difference in the experiences at Stanford and USC? Like, what was the difference?
Well,
you think?
Stanford is a
Like being in-
sprawling campus with open
a
hills.
lot of more
around
open
and so on.
space,
Yeah,
and USC is
right.
much more
Whereas
confined.
US,
Kind
well,
of.
it's in the middle of. I mean, it wasn't built in the middle, but LA grew around it, and
Yeah.
they didn't have the land that Stanford has, so there's not
Much more
buff-
compact and stuff.
Yeah, and the town was built around it
Excuse me.
in the early days, and so it was kind of run down, and it was kind of a ghetto when we lived there. And so
Did you live on campus, or were you out of?
no, not on, Stanford is an on-campus.
But USC.
95% of people live on campus, whereas USC was not that way. And so USC when I was there, was a big school of 40,000 students, and half of them were night students or something. They commuted in
From all over. I mean, all over LA,
Yeah.
right?
And even the guys that I went to dental school with, some of them commuted from Downey, which was an hour and a half drive every day.
Wow.
Each way. Yeah.
So